Good morning. Today is January the 30th, 2024. I hope everybody is having a good day so far. I want to go back 50 years today to January 30th, 1974. Last year, I made a whole lot of videos related to the year 1973, which was an important year in history, an important year in my life. The same thing can be said of 1974. Uh, Although the month of January was not as uh, events that were such historic in nature as January 73, still it was an important month in history. It was on Wednesday, January the 30th, 1974, that President Richard Nixon gave the State of the Union address to the 93rd United States Congress. He said, "We meet here tonight at a time of great challenge and great opportunities for America. We meet at a time when we face great problems at home and abroad that will test the strength of our fiber as a nation. But we also meet at a time when that fiber has been tested, it has proved strong. America is a great and good land. We're a great and good land because we're strong, free, creative people, because America is the single greatest force for peace anywhere in the world. Today, as always in our history, we can base our confidence in what the American people will achieve in the future and the record of what the American people have achieved in the past." This was given in the same year America withdrew all assistance from South Vietnam during the Vietnam War. And Nixon also called for the end of the Watergate investigations. I listened to that speech the other day and found it quite interesting, so relevant in many ways. One thing that there were several things that stood out. Nixon talked about 27 years earlier, which was the year of 1947, in which he was a freshman senator from California. And the freshman senator from Massachusetts was a man named John F. Kennedy. And they were both serving together on the Labor Committee. And they were there to listen to the State of the Union address by Harry Truman. Neither one of them had any idea that one day they would be delivering State of the Union addresses. In 1960, Richard Nixon was the Republican nominee for president. He was defeated by the Democratic nominee, John F. Kennedy, who was assassinated in 1963. Nixon was elected president in 1968 and reelected in 1972. And he stated that the year 73 was a trying year for his family and for himself because of the investigations into the break-in of the Democratic headquarters on June the 17th, 1972 at the Watergate. And he repeatedly stated that he had been cooperative with the Watergate Committee in every way possible. And he said that 1 year of Watergate was enough, and he looked forward to it being brought to a conclusion soon. Well, that didn't happen. In fact, things went from bad to worse, and things got totally out of control. And finally, on effective August the 9th, 1974, Richard Nixon resigned as President of the United States, the only time in history that's happened. But he also talked about, America being at peace, about having brought an end to the war in Vietnam. Well, it would be a little over a year after this, on April 30th, 1975, is when the war would finally end completely with the fall of Saigon. But Nixon talked about many different things, and he talked about health care, needing to make health care available to more Americans. That sounds very familiar. He talked about education, about the funding of education, and about making loans and scholarships more widely available. And here we're at the other end of that, in which many people who went to school during the 70s, 80s, and 90s, including myself. Actually, I went to school in the early 2000s as well. So let's see, 70s, yeah, 80s. Well, actually, graduated from high school in '69. I started junior college that year, and then I was in all the way through '76. Then I was in the doctoral program from '86 to '95, and then I went back and got a second master's from UTA in between 2004 and 2008. So 4 different decades there. But many of us have had our student loans canceled, and I thank God for that, because at the age of 72, as I'm trying to prepare for retirement and look forward, that's one added burden I don't have. And while I don't agree with President Joe Biden on everything, I just thank God for that measure of relief that he gave to many of us who did have to take out loans to go to school. And I'm just wondering how this thing's going to work in the future, because it's hard for me to visualize college ever being totally free. But I know policymakers in the future are going to have to find some way of assuring that the same problem of massive student debt won't happen again. Exactly how they're going to do that, I do not have the foggiest idea, but I know that issue is going to have to be addressed. You know, it's truly ironic that Richard Nixon, a man who's noted for conservatism, being the part of the very bad side of the establishment, it was under Nixon that the last combat troops were withdrawn from Vietnam. It was under Nixon that the draft ended. We went to an all-voluntary army. It was also under Nixon that the 18-year-olds got the right to vote. A lot of controversy during that time. Barry McGuire's song, Eve of Destruction, you're old enough to kill, but not for voting. You don't believe in war, but what that's gun you're toting. Well, you could be drafted at age 18, but you couldn't vote till 21. There was massive demonstrations throughout the country against the war in Vietnam and against the draft. And Nixon rightly concluded that if young people had the right to vote, they would have a greater opportunity they'd have greater invested in the system and less reason to protest, and they'd certainly be less likely to protest a war if they weren't going to be drafted. A lot of things have happened along that line. There's been some talk about eventually returning to the draft, but my prayer to God is that never happens. And I do recall, by the way, voting. I voted for the first time in March of 1972. I was 20. I turned 21 on May 22nd of 72. So I did benefit by the lowering of the voting age one time. And on January 18, 1983, I attended the inauguration of Mark White as governor of Texas. And one of the speakers at the Bluebonnet Ball was former U.S. Senator Ralph Yarborough, one of my heroes. And Ralph Yarborough had he made some remarks that night. I was able to go up and shake hands with him, and I told him that I had voted for the first time in 1972 in the Democratic primary, and I voted for him. Unfortunately, he didn't win, but we haven't had a U.S. senator like Ralph Yarborough since, and I long for that day. But back to 1974. I remember at the time, I don't guess I heard, I'm sure I didn't hear the speech because I wasn't a TV watcher then and didn't have a TV. On January 30th, 1974, I was living in Waco, my hometown. I was living at 1015 Spate with my roommate, Mike Contreras Jr. Mike was a good friend until his death in 2016. And I was working on my Master of Arts degree in Church State Studies at Baylor University. 1015 Spade was just a few blocks from the Baylor campus, and the 1973 and 1974 school year was really a wonderful time in my life. But what I ended up doing, well, that semester I had 4 very good courses. I had Dr. James Leo Garrett Jr. and Dr. Robert Miller. Dr. Garrett taught religion, Dr. Miller taught political science. They jointly taught the seminar in church-state relations. Then I had Dr. Miller for American constitutional law, which was required. They had 5-hour exams in there. That was really a doozy, but he was very good, very good teacher, and he really knew constitutional law. And Dr. Garrett later told me that he had audited Dr. Miller's course because he had been trained in theology, and at the time he didn't know anything about law, so they were able to come in it from different angles. And anyway, I had Church State Seminar Constitutional Law. I have Dr. Stanley Campbell for a second course in Black History. I'd had the first the previous semester. The courses were roughly divided with the year 1890 and prior to and after. And then I had a course in historiography, history of historical writing by Dr. Bruce Thompson. And at the end of that semester, that was the completion of all my coursework. And I began working on my master's thesis on the Nation of Islam, belief and practice in light of the American constitutional principle of religious liberty. So I'm sure I was at school at Baylor. I had a graduate assistantship in Church and State. I was working for Dr. Garrett. Also at the time, I was quite active at the St. Mary's Baptist Church in Waco under the leadership of the late Reverend Dewey Pinckney, a very dear friend of mine. It was so that year the Sundays were on would have been January the 6th, January the 13th, January the 20th, and January the 27th. I'm confident I attended service at St. Mary's all 4 of those Sundays of that month. And I remained active at St. Mary's for a little over a year after that. I joined in September of 73. And in April of 75, I changed denominations and became a minister in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and as I still am. And as I move toward retiring from the pastoral ministry in the year of 2026. But everything that we do today is certainly built on what went before. And 50 years ago, the State of the Union address of Richard Nixon, even though I'm not a big fan of Richard Nixon, it was a very interesting address. And it says so much about the events that would occur in the years that followed. And so as we look back 50 years, I wish everybody a wonderful January 30th of 2024. And may God bless everyone at the sound of my voice. Have a great day.